by just reviewing all the stuff that you already know about I time and ID. You guys are pretty good at that math. One of you, when you did that, when you gave your choice, I still gave you the 2 points for it because you had, I think you forgot the 1. Like it turned out like a 0.5, like it was a typo. I don't remember which one of you it was. But I gave you the point because I could tell where your math was. So you still got it. So remember a total, when we're talking about timing on a ventilator, I time is the amount of time it takes for the breath to be delivered. Okay, there's a lot of factors that play into that, right? What mode of ventilation you're in. In volume control, the ventilator uses an algorithm to decide how long it should take to get a 400 ml breath into Kiara, okay? And then she can decide if she likes that or not. And if she doesn't like it, she's gonna try to pull harder and you're gonna see some breath stacking. That's that whole asynchrony thing we were talking about, okay? I can do some stuff to change that. I can physically manipulate the I time and set it, or I can manipulate something called the rise time, which makes it go faster. That's that analogy of going to Santa Fe between 60 and 90 miles an hour, okay? So I time and E time, as you know, make up your total cycle time. The total cycle time is found with these two equations. You should already have them. If your movies are not straightened out, now's the time. You may, in fact, want to start over and rewrite it just so you have a full big version of it that has everything you need. But I can find I time a whole bunch of other different ways, okay? So I can find I time. This is the one we've been practicing. I can find the I time if I subtract the E time from total cycle time. I can find the I time by taking the total cycle time times the I time percentage, but you're gonna do it as a decimal. Baby ventilators in particular give you I time as a percentage. So it might be 25%, it might be 30%, okay? We're going to use that as a decimal. So you would take your total cycle time of 4, for example, times 0.25, that is how you're gonna get your I time. That's one we haven't talked enough about, that's what we're doing today. I can also get it by taking the E time times the I ratio from your IDE. And I have this as well. Total cycle time divided by the IDE parts gives us another way to get I time. That's the one some of y'all were just needing some clarification on the test, okay? Any questions about how these are laid out? Okay, like I said, if your movie is not straightened out, now's a fabulous time. Okay. Now, old school days. Okay, remember we talked about I to E ratio. And I had said to you, I wanted you to learn it this way because we were going to have to flip it at some point. Here's when you flip it. Traditionally, and what we've discussed so far, we have a 1-2 something IE, right? That's the way people are meant to be ventilated. That's the way they like to be ventilated. But old school, we actually used to do a pressure control ventilation with what they call an inverse IDE. Okay? Now, this was super sucky because I would force you to take this really long I time breath, and then I would let you exhale for half of that. And then I would let you do it again, and I would let you exhale to half that. So guess who had to be paralyzed?
That patient.
That patient, because they're going to hate me, right? I'm not going to be able to get them to do anything I want them to do. I got about 15 movie here needs to be mine. I've had this movie ever since I started here. That's why it's all jacked up. So the reason I made you line it this way, where you were literally, you knew you were going to have a 1, but I wanted you to line it out, was because we're going to flip it. So in old school ventilation, inverse ratio meant you had a longer time to breathe in than you did to breathe out. Okay? People hated it. Well, why did we do it? We did it for people who had ARDS and had very low compliance, because we're trying to recruit alveoli in this case and improve ventilation and oxygenation. However, as a patient, you had to be totally snowed and paralyzed in order for us to do this, okay? So we used to do old school pressure control with an inverse IDE to treat people with ARDS, okay? But now, we actually have some cool stuff. We have new modes, APRV, bi-level, and bi-vent, which we're gonna talk about coming up, where you actually are taking different levels of pressure and making it so the patient can breathe easier. We're gonna cover that in about a week. Doing that, and why we did it old school, was we actually improved the BQ mismatching. It improved it a lot. The problem was if you were not totally paralyzed, you weren't doing it. Guess how many pneumos we gave to people this way? A lot. It was not great, but that was what was done at the time. Now if you're gonna calculate it, okay, you have a patient who's on a pressure control mode with a rate of 20 and an I time of 2 seconds. What's the patient's IDE? Okay, so let's try it. Do the math and see what you find. Okay, what are you getting? Anybody figure anything out yet? Huh?
First one's a 2-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, precisely. Do you want to know how she got it? Did you guys get it?
Just
Want to come do it? Come and press this with your big brain. I'm super lucky because actually all of you here have a very big brain. I was listening to one of the instructors complain about their classes and I'm like, I am so lucky. So you draw out the rest of your I time to E time in the beginning so people can see. So just put ET under both of those. Again, you want to set it up methodically because if you skip a step, your brain could miss it. Okay, perfect. Perfect, okay? Does that make sense? Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so we have to find total cycle time because we need our I time. You can't do any of these formulas without both parts, right? So if you take your 60 divided by 20, which was what we were given for a rate, that gives us a 3-second total cycle time. I have to figure out my E time, so the formula for that is total cycle time minus the I time, which gave us 1 second left over. You put it into the ratio, you get a 2-to-1. Okay? Anybody brave enough to try the second one? Okay, it does a little bit better. I have faith in you. So set up your equation just like she did over here. So you're gonna do it this way, and then just fill in your I to E, your I time and E time. So you know your E time is that, so what is my I time? Is you need the 2 up, you need the where it goes 3. That's your I time you were given. So your I time is 3 seconds. Okay, put that over your E time, which you just found out was 1 second. And then the ratio, and then a 1 to 1. 1 over 1. Divide it out. Okay, perfect. Okay. Now, if all this escapes your mind when you get home later, if you pull up this PowerPoint with the notes pages, I actually put it in here in the notes part. So if you ever notice that, if I've got stuff written below, if you print up the notes pages, it comes up at the bottom with every step. Okay, so there's a lot of these where I worked out the math because I had to for the last class because we were at home and they couldn't see what the hell I was doing. so if you print this up, you have to print this up with the note pages, you'll get all of that. Okay, so if you get home and figure out like, what in the heck was she asking me to do? It'll all pop up in the notes page at the bottom. Okay, you got it. Ready? I feel like kind of like, I'm shooting stuff off. Spin the wheel. So like I said, old school. We don't really do a whole lot of inverse ratio ventilation today. However, with COVID, I have seen it making a comeback. Okay, where they're deliberately, you know, ventilating people at rates of the 38 per minute range and crap like that. And they're deliberately setting I times to get it inverse I to E. Again, who's getting pneumothorax? You get a pneumo, you get a pneumo, you get a pneumo. I don't think it's necessarily a good thing to do. Okay? So another variation of this is if you don't have I time and you have to find the I time first. Okay? Okay, so the first one, you're going to want to figure out the total cycle time, and then you have to find the E time. Okay, so do that one first. Total cycle time and then the E time.
Is it a regular formula we do?
What's that?
This is just the regular formula we've been doing, right?
Yep.
So it's 1 to 0.33?
So it's gonna, let's take the, no fancy things.
It's not? Okay, never mind. this one?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind.
Okay. So first thing we have to do is figure out what the total cycle time is, right? Okay, I was given the I time, so that's find the E time. Put it into my inverted little weird formula over there, right? So anytime that you have an I time that's higher or longer than the E time, you're going to use the inverse ratio formula. So make sure you write that down somewhere. Let note to yourself, okay?
Say that again.
Yeah, so anytime I have an I time that's longer than E, I'm going to be using this inverse ratio side of it, okay? Otherwise your math's not going to work out. So I have,
So it's 3 to 1.
yep. Correct, sir. That's how. And like I said, guys, I'm gonna make some math practice for you guys to work on these, okay? We should have time today, we'll have some time in class that we can work on it together and just see how you're doing with it. So does everybody see how we got 3 to 1? More importantly, does anybody not see how we got 3 to 1? Okay. Now the second one, I have some different data. So I have a rate of 30, I have a tidal volume of 600, and I have a flow of 30. So I need another formula for this, don't I? Okay. I don't know why banging on this makes that go weird. I'm very confused. Thank you. This one brain dead. Here, me. Thank you. I'm like, it's one brain dead, never mind. Thank you. I'm like, I'm missing something important. We should end up with a 1 to 5 to 1. Okay. So like I said, with any 2 of 3 known parts, you can find the other piece. Okay? And depending on what the boards want to do to you to torture you, you may get some of this, you may get none of this actually. The last few groups of students have gone to take their practice exams and took their NBRC practice and their actual exams. Said whereas before, my students might have had 20 or 30 formulas to deal with on the board, people are now seeing like maybe 10. And it may be, what is this formula for? What's the normal value? Why do I care if it's high or low? It could be any of that. So, you know, math is not your jam. As long as you know everything else real hardcore, you should be okay. Okay. All right, so now I have a patient on the ventilator with an IVE of 3 to 1 and an E time of 1 second. So now I have to do this a little differently again. I got it by my I time using a different formula. So start with that. Tell me what you get.
4.5.
Okay. What's the patient's ventilator rate? That's the last part. So you found 4.5 for this one? Okay, so it's my E time. my total cycle time becomes 6. I just added I time plus lead time. And if I know that my total cycle time is 6, then I can reverse engineer that to figure out what the rate is. And I get 10. Okay, not so hideous if you just break it down into little nuggets, little pieces. Okay, everybody still with me? Yeah, sure? Sure, just make it stop, what?
Like, I understand the math, my question is really just like, why would we use this? Cause in my mind, it just feels like it would do a lot more harm than good. You
And
know,
that's
cause
something
you
that
run the
needs
risk
to
of doing a pneumo, and this probably screws with the person's blood gases to a ridiculous amount, cause they don't have time to blow off CO2.
Absolutely, and we also decrease cardiac output by putting more pressure in the chest. So there's lots of reasons not to do it. I think what we're seeing nowadays that they're trying to be used to some degree is because of COVID and they just don't know what else to do. But not in a good way, for sure. We're gonna talk in a week or so, I think it's like 10 days or so, on the next lecture on this, but we talk about the specialty modes, and that's where APRV falls in, bi-level and bi-vent. And that is kind of the new and improved, safer way to do this. But you can tell me, you've been to clinicals now, have you seen anybody on bi-level, APRV, or bi-vent? Why do you think that is?
They're expensive.
No. Some of the vents have them, that vent has it, that vent has it, that vent has a variation of it. Why do you think they don't use it? They don't understand it. That's exactly right. They have no damn clue how to use it. And in the times that you could get a physician to try to use it, it doesn't work. And I have a theory on this. I think it's because they tried it too late. So when you're literally just starting to be artsy or COVID-y and your lungs are going to hamburger, that is the time you should be doing some of these extra special modes. Not when they're already half dead on 100% and a PEEP of 20, because by then it's not going to do nothing for you. Okay. Okay. Now some ventilators, I time is represented as I time percentage. When the I time is set as a percentage, then it's considered a part of the total cycle time. So in other words, it's not just a one, it's a value related to a percentage for total cycle time. So for example, a patient on the ventilator has a rate of 10 and an I time percent of 25. What's the patient's I time? So the formula is I time equals total cycle time times I time percent as a decimal. So I'm just gonna move my little decimal point that way, okay? 6, because that's my total cycle time, times 0.25 gives me a 1.5 second I time. This is gonna be important with baby ventilators. Most of the adult ventilators don't give you an option to ventilate this way. I wanna say maybe the Draeger does. I need to get my hands on a Draeger, I haven't played with one ever. But if it's set as a percentage, and I wanna know what the actual I time calculation is, it's very simple, okay? So try it. See if you get the same thing that's on the screen. If you work it out, do you get what's up there? Okay, so when you flip it and you're looking for the I time percent instead of the I time, are you able to do it? again, so like just with minute ventilation and tidal volume and rate, you've got 2 or 3 formulas, you just gotta flip it around to make it do what you want it to do. Okay? Now pause time is that tricky little thing. Servo volume control defaults to a pause time, which is in effect an inspiratory hold. Okay? Not nice to people who want to breathe for themselves. Very nice for people who are paralyzed and sedated in the order to recruit. That's what it's for. Okay? Pause time actually lengthens your eye time. Write that down in big letters. Pause time lengthens eye time to some degree. So on your lab tomorrow, one of the questions is, you institute a pause time. What does it do to the eye time? It's going to make it longer. So if I want to figure out what the pause time actually is, I'm going to base that off of something called the pause percentage. And so the formula is here. Pause time is the total cycle time times the pause percent as a decimal. Well, that looks very similar to the formula we just did, looking for inspiratory time when you have an eye time percent. Okay? So if you were going to try this, you have a patient on a vent with a rate of 20, so my total cycle time is 3, and a pause of 10%. Okay? So pause time, because it's a reference to total cycle time, I'm going to put 3 in here times the pause percent as a decimal, so 3 times 0.1 is going to give me a 0.3 second pause time. Does that make sense? Okay. And again, for your next test in here, until we get better, I'm going to let you use your WUBI. So make sure you're updating your WUBI to where it makes sense. And you have all the formulas on it that you need to bring. Okay. Now I could do the pause percent the same way. It would just be this formula that we just did. So you can fix this. I lost the slide for it, but it should say, it would say up here, pause percent. So the pause percent, I'm gonna add a slide, hold on, let me just fix this because I don't like it. Okay, so that's the formula for it. You can see it on the computer. That is super teeny tiny. Like that. Does that make sense? Pause percent is the pause time in seconds divided by total cycle time. You okay with that one? Okay. Now we can also do the same thing with rise time. Now what rise time does, rise time is related to how fast or slow a breath is delivered, okay? Which is related to eye time, but you can also help a patient be more comfortable by messing with the rise, okay? So the rise time function determines the amount of time it takes for flow or the pressure to reach where you're trying to go to, okay? It's usually set as a percentage, and the function is called flow acceleration on the 980, and it's called rise time on the servo. So when you're looking for those buttons, make sure you highlight that. On the servo, it's rise time. On the 980 and the 840, it's called flow acceleration. Which really is kind of a better term for it, I think, right? Saying flow, I'm just going faster with the flow, right? So formulas to calculate it, if I wanted to find the rise time as a percentage, I would take the rise time in seconds, if that's how it is on the ventilator, divided by total cycle time. Or I would take the rise time, if I'm looking for rise time specifically, I can take the rise time percent as a decimal times total cycle time. Now, the one you're gonna see the most is related to looking for the actual rise time as part of your total cycle time. We just have to be aware of how to do these, okay? And like I said, I'm gonna give you some to practice, so you'll feel better about it, okay? So rise time, expiratory, rise time and pause time and I time percent all have the same variations of the formula. Okay, it's just what are you looking for? Okay. Alarms. Now we talked a lot about alarms already so far as where the boards want you to set them. But the vent has some other buttons that are related to it, and one of which is the alarm silence button. When you hit the alarm silence button, it will slow it down or make it shut up, depending on what the ventilator is designed to do. Okay, now I mean, if I'm going to, we hit that alarm silence because we're gonna suction a patient, it may or may not save them from the vent going off. Some of them default, no matter what you hit the peak pressure, it's going to alarm, okay? But if I just, if I'm gonna mess with something, I can hit the alarm silence while I'm fiddling with some of the features. Maybe I can make it be quiet for a little while. So, the alarm silence button silences the alarm for a specified time period depending on the type of ventilator. It does not fix the problem, which is my issue with nurses. Because they walk in and hit silence and turn around and walk away, and I've given you lots of analogies of what that's like. You have to troubleshoot why the thing is going off. But what I don't want you to do is walk into a patient's room, have the vent screaming at you because there's an alarm going off, and you stand there like an idiot trying to read it. Hit silence, and then read what it says, and then correct it. Does that make sense? You're gonna see a lot of people walk in and just stare at the machine because it's yelling. Well, that's fabulous, it's only to fix it, but make it be quiet while you're trying to fix it and read what it's telling you is wrong. Every alarm will tell you what went off and why it alarmed, okay? Most ventilators will silence for about 2 minutes, but we still have to fix the problem. So if rise time and flow acceleration have to do with speed of the flow of the breath, inspiratory cycle off is something that allows a spontaneous breath to end. Okay, so when I put somebody in SIMV and I add pressure support, it's the inspiratory cycle off that lets the breath turn off. Okay, so you're saying I want the patient to have 30% of that pressure support before I'm going to let them turn it off. Okay, it's only available on spontaneous modes of breathing. So on the servo, it's called inspiratory cycle off. On the 980, it's called expiratory sensitivity. So part of your lab tomorrow is to put a vent and pressure control, and then to flip it to SIMV and see what other buttons you get to play with. One of which is going to be the inspiratory cycle off. That will not pop up unless you have a way for a patient to take spontaneous pressure supported breaths. Make sense? Again, better demonstrated tomorrow. O2 breath is a hard pad, usually somewhere on the face of the ventilator. Where you hit it, it gives the patient 100% for 2 minutes. This is that one where we hit that before we suction the patient so that we don't cause atelectasis. Hopefully we're not making them desaturate. Remember, for the boards and Dr. O, you hyperoxygenate and hyperventilate. Don't forget both. The manual breath pad is pretty self-explanatory. If I walk up and hit the manual breath button, I just give the patient extra breath. And if you wanna kind of bag them up a little bit, you can do that. You can just hit manual breath, manual breath, manual breath. Now, the problem is that if I'm bagging you with my bag valve mask, I can give you a bigger squeeze if I want to, and I can give you a little more tidal volume. On the vent, if I hit the manual breath pad, it's only gonna give you another breath at whatever you have preset. So if I have Kiara at 300 mLs, because she's COVID-y, and I wanna bag her up a little bit, if I just keep hitting manual breath, I'm only giving her 300, 300, 300. Where, if I take her off the vent and I put a bag on her and I give her half of a bag squeeze, that's 500 mLs, right? So be aware of that, okay? The nice thing the manual breath pad does is, let's say I wanna listen to somebody's lungs, and they're on a rate of like 10, and I don't wanna stand there for 6 seconds and wait for them to breathe. I just hit the button, a breath delivered, I can auscultate, okay? We can use it to hyperventilate before, but again, in realizing you're just giving another breath of the same size and parameter of what's set. The function is called the start breath pad on the servo. Manual breath on the Avia and the 980. Two more slides and we'll take a break. So we used to use something old school called a sigh. We deliberately set a large breath, and it was typically 1.5 to 2 times the patient's set tidal volume. We would set one as a frequency, so maybe 2 or 3 times a minute you gave somebody a huge breath, okay? Problem was that you actually caused a lot of increasing peak pressures, problems with cardiac output, but the reason you did a sigh breath was to recruit alveoli. This is known as an alveolar recruitment maneuver. Let me say that one more time, alveolar recruitment maneuver. Sigh breath. We would use it to treat atelectasis. So it is a little dangerous, so most modern ventilators don't have this as a choice, okay? But that's not to say I couldn't walk into Leah's room and take her 500 tidal volume and turn it up to 1,000 for a couple breaths. Same kind of theory, but it is a little dangerous. It can cause barotrauma. And in our COVID patients with their very friable lungs, it can cause pneumonia. So I haven't used this on a patient in forever, but the purpose for it is to recruit alveoli, okay? And it's 1.5 to 2 times the patient's normal tidal volume. That's what you need to know for this class, okay? Treat atelectasis, a size of a breath 1.5 or 2 times the size of patient's normal tidal volume. That's the size.
1.5 to 2 times.
Yep, their normal tidal volume. That's the size of the breath they were targeting for a sigh. And you guys say all the time, who yawns? That's a sigh. Do you know people say, we always assume that you're yawning because you're tired? That's not why your body yawns. Did you know that?
It's more oxygen.
It's more oxygen. It's because at some point the chemoreceptors in your brain tipped off and said, you're looking a little hypoxic, you better yawn. Now, why do we do that when we're sleepy? Well, because we're kind of hypoventilating because we really need to take our butts to bed. So, I don't know if you knew that or not. Okay, last part. Inspiratory and expiratory pauses. And again, I went through this during the test review, but I just want you to understand, okay? An inspiratory pause gives you a plateau. So tomorrow, when you hook up your servo, put it in volume first and measure that automatic pause, because it's in there every single breath. And so when you get your breath, you're like, phew, and then a pause. Phew, and then a pause, okay? A pause lengthens your eye time. It's done to measure plateau pressure, which is that second statement there. Plateau pressure references alveolar pressure. So that's the purpose of looking at the plateau. And in fact, for our COVID people who are really sick, we actually chart the plateau now. We never did that before. We chart it on every single COVID patient. So the expiratory pause is looking for auto peep. Intrinsic peep, sometimes it's called a cult peep. Air trapping, there's lots of words for it. Now, both the plateau and the auto peep are very, very hard to do on one of these test lungs because they're super compliant. So that's one of the first things I want you guys to do when you get into clinicals or you come with me. I'm going to show you that plateau and I'm going to show you the pauses so you can see what it looks like on a real human. It's just something we really can't simulate well in here because the test lungs are so compliant. Okay. Last part is standby. So every one of these ventilators has a way to put it in standby, okay? The servo, remember I told you, it's got an on ventilator button in the back. It has a patient on button right here. This is also the standby. So if I want to put it in standby, I'm going to hit that. It's going to say, do you really want to go to standby? And I can say yes. But as soon as I hit that, it will stop ventilating. So I need to make sure I have something else for my patient, okay? On the 980, and remind me tomorrow, I'll re-demonstrate this for you, you have to turn it off to put it in standby, which sounds counterintuitive, right? Didn't I say to you that once you turn something off, you have to recalibrate it? Not the 980. The 840 and the 980 are set up to be turned off in order to go to standby. So what you do is you flip it off, and then you turn it right back on with it disconnected from the patient, and it will ask you if you want to go to standby. The Avia in the menu section has a standby button, and you probably have seen that. So why do we put people on standby? Well, if you're just setting the vent up in the first place, for one thing. I don't want it screaming at me or blowing wet juice all over a room while I'm trying to set it up, okay? If I have to take somebody out to travel, I'm taking them to CAT scan, I'm taking them somewhere. I don't want the vent blowing air all over the room with COVID goobers while I'm gone, okay? But typically you can put it in standby while you're setting it up, and it'll make it be quiet. Okay? Any questions? Are your brains about to explode already?